Hey guys, welcome to another film camera review. Today we're looking at the Leica Minilux. It's a high-end point-and-shoot released by Leica. It's got a 40mm f2.4 Summarit lens. Everything you've heard about this lens is true. It's sharp, it's beautiful. More on that later. I'm going to go over the buttons and dials that are on the camera. I'm going to start with the top plate here because that's pretty much where everything is. You've got your self-timer button, which activates your self-timer. You've got your exposure, your EV button, which is your exposure compensation button. And that works by holding it down. Your EV indicator in the LCD will start blinking after maybe 4 seconds of holding this button down. And then you can cycle through your exposure compensation values. It basically goes from 0 up to half, and then 1, 1.5, and then 2, and then drops down to -2, and then kind of goes back up to 0 and cycles through like that in half-stop increments. So it doesn't have a dial like, for example, say on a Contax T2. I think one of the best features of a Contax T2 is that it's got an exposure compensation dial, so you can kind of choose that on the fly if you want to compensate for exposure in a certain scene. It's really easy to do that on a Contax T2. On the Leica Minilux, it's not so easy to do that. The other thing is, if it will remember your exposure compensation that you've set it at when you turn it off and turn it back on. So if you have it set at -2 and you turn the camera off, it will remember that value when you turn it back on. So you might load a new roll of film even, and you might be getting some missed exposures, or rather some bad exposures on that roll of film because it remembers the exposure compensation value. So you've got to remember to reset that or change it back to whatever you want it to be when you turn the camera off and on, or load a new roll of film. So moving on, you've got your mode button, which cycles through your flash modes. It's got your standard modes, which are basically on, off, auto, forced on, and it's got a slow synchro mode as well. And then moving on to this dial, you've got 2 dials here that are one on top of the other. It's got your power dial, one. It's got this little tab here which will turn the camera on and off. So in the first position, you're in your program mode, which is basically your auto mode. And then if you move on to the next positions, those are your manually selected apertures. So the cool thing about this camera is that you can manually select the apertures. You can't manually select shutter speeds. You can only shoot it in aperture priority. The dial on top is your focus dial. So in the first position, which is that little green indicator there, is autofocus. So if you want to shoot this camera completely manual, just make sure you're on the little green tabs there, and you're shooting completely auto. Now with this dial, you can choose your focus manually. You can focus manually with it, and it goes from infinity all the way down to 0.7 meters. So the closest this camera will focus is 0.7 meters. Now, one thing that you really have to be careful about with this camera is that you can bump this focus dial out of place. When I first got this camera, I tended to grab it out of my bag like this, and when you can't see it, but when you grab it like that, this little that focus dial will turn. My first roll that I shot with this thing, I actually shot with nearly half the roll at infinity focus. I didn't realize that I had bumped it out of place. So I was taking pictures of people up close, and a lot of that roll was out of focus. Otherwise, if you like to be able to kind of zone focus or manually focus, if you're shooting street, that could come in really handy because it doesn't have to autofocus. It's already pre-focused, and you can just mash the shutter button and it'll shoot at that pre-focused length. Now, as far as the autofocus goes, it actually grabs focus pretty quickly. This is a really quick operating camera. In terms of its operation, I don't have any complaints about it. It's a really fun camera to shoot. The back panel is really simple. You've got your viewfinder there. The viewfinder is really tiny. That's probably one of my only complaints about this camera, is that the viewfinder is super, super tiny. And a lot of people have complained about that too. You can read about, you know, a lot of other reviews and watch a lot of other reviews, and people always complain about that tiny viewfinder. You've got your film window, so you can see what kind of film you're shooting. Most modern compacts are going to have that anyway. You've got your, in the viewfinder, you've got your 2 lights, which you can see that light blinking right now. That means it's not grabbing focus. It's too close. It's wanting to grab focus on my face, but it's too close, so that means the shot will not be in focus. And if you push the shutter button down, it will not take a picture. Now, if you focus on something further, you can see that light came on. It's solid green. That means it's in focus, and it will take a picture. Now, there's another light there. It's a red light. It's on top. There you go. You can see that now. That red light. It's on top of that green light. That means the flash needs to go off, and the flash will go off when you press that shutter button. That's what those 2 lights are. The bottom of the camera is pretty simple. You've got your serial number there, your battery door, and your tripod socket mount, and those are pretty much the feature of this camera. It's a super fun camera to shoot. It's not the most compact camera. You're not going to be able to put it in your pants pocket, maybe a jacket pocket. You know, I put it in one of the compartments in my camera bag, for a shoulder bag for easy access. But it's not the smallest compact on the market by any means. For example, Stylus Epic is going to be way smaller than this, way lighter than this. This thing is built like a metal brick. And it's nice and heavy. I would even say it's kind of heavy for its size. I mean, it's not strangely heavy, but I mean, it's made out of metal. It's sturdy, but it is heavy. You know, but otherwise it feels nice. It's not going to sprain your wrist by any means. Now, onto the lens. Everything you've heard about this lens, everything you've read about this lens, assuming you've done any research before watching this review, is all true. This lens is razor sharp. It's really beautiful. You can kind of see the front element there. The size of that front element is pretty big considering it's on a compact camera, but the lens is absolutely gorgeous. It's just a beautiful lens. Takes really sharp pictures, and as I mentioned before, you know, it grabs autofocus pretty quickly. So, you know, that's something that I'm really happy about with this camera. The viewfinder, super tiny. It is ridiculously tiny. I mean, that's probably its single worst feature on an otherwise great camera, is that the viewfinder is tiny. And that's pretty much all to it. It's a simple camera, really fun to shoot. I really like it. These can be very expensive. I see these black Miniluxes going on eBay for between $400 and $600. That's a pretty pricey camera. Is it worth it? That's completely up to you. You know, if you can find a good deal on one, then that would be great. There's a couple of places I would recommend, you know, like a Facebook group called Film Photo Gear. That sometimes these will show up on sale, but if you can find these at a good deal, I would highly recommend trying it out, if not just for the lens alone. The lens is absolutely beautiful. One last thing I want to mention is that you can actually, if this thing were to break, which, by the way, if you were to Google this, you'll hear a lot about it, something like an EO2 error. I guess sometimes these things break and it's hard to get them repaired, if you can get them repaired at all. But if they do break, you can actually go through Japan Camera Hunter and get this lens converted to be an M mount lens. So you can mount it on your M mount camera, like for example, say, if you have a Leica M3 or an M6, you can you know, salvage this lens, which is gorgeous. I can't stress how gorgeous this lens is, and get it converted to an M mount and put it on your M6. But anyway, that's it about this camera. It's pretty simple, really fun to shoot. If you can find one, I'd highly recommend trying it out. Thanks for watching. There's a link below to some pictures I've taken with this camera over the last couple of months, and a link to my website where you can find a lot of other fun film photography stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.